Hello guys, I'm Comrade Darkslayer, and today I'm going to tell you why we need a revolution in this country and why America is so fascist. I'm going to show you evidence of the most corrupt cases in American history and the present and why America is so fascist. And I'm going to demonstrate those corrupt things our government has done and why we need a real revolution in this country. So I'll be showing you the most darkest corrupt cases in American history, and why the government is. I'm going to be showing you overwhelming evidence of why the government is so corrupt, and why we need to change this country. Why we need a real Marxist revolution in this country, like a real socialist revolution in this country, because of just how fascist America is. So I'm going to be showing you overwhelming evidence of why America is so fascist, and why we need to change it, why we need to stop it, why we need to save America, and why we need to stop the evil forces and take down the evil shadow government and overthrow the government, or at least reform the government and destroy the secret government once and for all. So here's the evidence I'll be presenting to you. Here's what I'll show you, and here it is. And without further ado, here's the video documentary evidence I'll show you right now. So,
moments later, the train overtook the motionless boys. The victims were Don Henry, 16, and Kevin Ives, 17, both of Saline County, Arkansas. They would have started their senior year at Bryant High School the next day. Kevin had spent the night at Don's house, and the two had ventured outside a little after midnight, never to return. Little did anyone know at the time that these two friends had unwittingly stumbled upon an underworld of drug smuggling and government corruption. A cover-up of unbelievable proportions was about to begin.
I believe Kevin and Don were near the tracks that night and saw either money or drugs drop from an airplane. I believe that law enforcement officers killed them, and the cover-up began immediately. Expanded to the medical examiner, Fahmy Malek.
At the time, Fahmy Malek, Arkansas State Medical Examiner, was the one responsible for ruling on cause of death. His plan was to rule the boys' death a double suicide. However, after conferring with Jim Steed, Saline County Sheriff, they decided no one would accept such a ruling and changed the cause of death to accidental.
We were absolutely puzzled and outraged over the ruling of accidental as a manner of death. We didn't think that the facts supported that ruling, and what we started out to do was just to obtain a second opinion. We met resistance from all fronts, from law enforcement, from the crime lab. We retained an attorney and a private investigator and obtained court orders to get testable samples of everything that they had in order to get a second opinion, and Fahmy Malek refused to obey the court orders.
Without any supporting evidence, Malek ruled that the boys had each smoked more than 20 marijuana cigarettes, and in a psychedelic stupor had fallen asleep on the tracks. It was later learned that the state crime lab never even tested for the concentration of marijuana, and in fact had used a test on the boys' blood which was designed to be used on urine. Outside experts were shocked at the absurd ruling. The family's nightmare battle against the state medical examiner was made more difficult by Governor Clinton's public support of Malek. However, after 13 long months, the parents were finally able to prove what they had believed all along, that the boys had indeed been murdered.
17-year-old Kevin Ives and 16-year-old Don Henry were struck by a train near Alexander. The medical examiner has said that the boys were asleep and drugged with marijuana. The parents, however, disputed that claim and persuaded authorities to reopen the case.
Because of their persistence, Kevin and Don's bodies were exhumed. New autopsies were performed, and a grand jury was convened. Dr. Joseph Burton, a nationally recognized forensic pathologist from out of state, performed the new autopsies. His findings revealed that Don Henry had been stabbed in the back and Kevin Ives' face had been smashed by a blow from a rifle butt before their bodies were placed on the railroad tracks.
This information alone would strongly suggest that the boys were injured, rendered unconscious, or even killed prior to their bodies being run over by the train.
Burton's autopsies also revealed that Malik had mutilated Kevin's skull by sawing it in so many different directions that it was impossible to tell where the original skull fractures were. Malik also had completely dismantled Kevin's jawbones. Burton stated he had performed thousands of autopsies and had never seen anything like it. Eyewitnesses had implicated several people in the murders and subsequent cover-up, including Prosecutor Dan Harmon, Deputy Prosecutor Richard Garrett, Sheriff Jim Steed, and Officers Jay Campbell, Kirk Lane, and Danny Allen. Throughout his career, Dan Harmon has been protected by the powerful and corrupt in Arkansas. In 1990, he was arrested on 4 misdemeanor counts of tax evasion. At his arraignment, he was ordered to take a routine drug test which would have allowed him to go free. He refused and spent 18 days in jail. Harmon was later convicted of one of the charges and was sentenced by the notorious U.S. District Judge Henry Woods to 1-year probation, the absolute minimum allowed. As a result of his conviction, Harmon's law license was suspended. The suspension, however, was rescinded after a long list of high-ranking Arkansas officials, including Attorney General Winston Bryant, testified on Harmon's behalf. For many years, Bryant had been involved in the MENA drug smuggling investigations. More recently, at least 15 domestic violence complaints filed against Harmon by a number of his ex-wives have surfaced. The complaints, some of which Harmon has admitted to, range from holding a gun to his wife's head to biting off the thumb of one of his victims. Charges were never filed, and the reports were kept from the public by Harmon's friend, Benton Police Chief Rick Elmendorf. Dan Harmon continued to receive extremely favorable treatment from the Arkansas press. His continued re-election as Saline County prosecutor also gave him control over the Drug Task Force, Gene Duffy's old job. In November 1995, a package containing fake cocaine labeled as evidence belonging to Harmon's Drug Task Force was found in the possession of Harmon's wife, Holly. An investigation revealed the package had originally contained more than $100,000 worth of pure cocaine, which was now missing. A combined raid by the FBI and DEA confiscated drug-related files from Harmon's home and office. A racketeering case against Harmon was reportedly being built. However, after years of seeing similar investigations go nowhere, a weary public remains understandably skeptical. Finally, on November 29, 1995, the FBI, referring to Kevin and Don's murders, announced to Linda Ives that in light of the fact there is no evidence, it's time you consider the fact that a crime has not been committed. The obstruction of justice continues.
There aren't any words in the English language that can describe how it makes you feel as a parent or as a citizen of Arkansas to see what our officials are capable of doing. You know, I think we were just kind of naive, common, ordinary people. Got up and went to work every day and came home and went to bed and assumed that everybody else did the same thing and tried to do what was right. And I think Kevin's death has been the rudest awakening that anybody could ever have to see what really goes on and to see what's important to elected and public officials. This is not a political issue with me. We were never a political family. Our lives revolved around the ball field and going to the lake and all of the things that a family does until the Arkansas political machine reached into our lives and destroyed the tranquility that we had. And I want the American people to know that we have to stand up against this kind of corruption, and we have to hold our officials accountable and make them work for us instead of against us. In my experience, I believe what is happening here in Arkansas is only a small sample as to what is happening nationwide, And I believe that all of America has to stand up and rescue the American system of justice.
The reputation you develop for intellectual and ethical integrity will be your greatest asset or your worst enemy.
It was July 20th, 1993, 6 months to the day after Bill Clinton assumed the office of President of the United States. Deputy White House Counsel Vincent Foster Jr. was found dead at 6 p.m. in Fort Marcy Park, just outside of Washington, D.C. Before Foster's body had even cooled, the national media had already pronounced suicide as the cause of death. Clinton himself confirmed the media's ruling, ignoring the fact that investigations were still in preliminary stages and therefore inconclusive. It would be another 6 months before anyone in the mainstream media would seriously begin investigating for themselves the circumstances surrounding Foster's death. Bill Clinton and Vince Foster were childhood friends who grew up together in Arkansas. Young Foster excelled in everything he did, becoming a star athlete and senior class president,
graduating first in his class at Arkansas Law School and receiving the highest marks on his state bar exams for the year. He became a senior partner at the powerful Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, where he practiced alongside Hillary Clinton and Webb Hubbell. Despite objections from his wife, Lisa, Foster accepted Clinton's request to become deputy White House counsel and followed his lifelong friend to Washington. The American people might have shown more interest in Foster's death had they realized one thing. He was the highest-ranking federal official to die under questionable circumstances since John F. Kennedy. From the outset, the investigation into the death of Vince Foster has been marred by controversy. At Bill Clinton and Attorney General Janet Reno's insistence, responsibility for the investigation was turned over to the Park Police, even though Foster's death fell within the jurisdiction of the FBI. Not until his death had sufficiently developed into a full-fledged scandal 7 months later would the FBI be allowed in. The results of the FBI's investigation, along with the findings of the Park Police and coroner, were incorporated into a report issued by Special Counsel Robert Fisk. The report, released June 30th, 1994, confirmed suicide as the cause of death. However, a careful examination of key pieces of evidence taken directly from the report itself indicate a number of alarming contradictions inconsistent with the report's own conclusion that Foster took his life. Sergeant George Gonzalez, a lead paramedic for the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue, was one of the first on the scene after responding to a 911 call. Gonzalez, a 13-year veteran, had previously examined a number of suicide victims with gunshot wounds to the head. He was shocked by the obvious lack of blood at the scene, stating, "Usually a suicide by gunshot is a mess." His observations were confirmed by many others who were present, including members of the Park Police. Christopher Ruddy, who at the time was a reporter for the New York Post, had discovered that most of those on the scene that night had never been interviewed, an oversight which he quickly began to correct.
In January of 1994, I went down and met with some of the emergency workers and police that were at the scene that night. And I found out that many of them were surprised about the body and the condition of Mr. Foster's body when they found it. For example, the lead paramedic who was at the scene that night noted that he had never seen a suicide like this, gunshot wound to the head, with so little blood.
Gene Wheaton, retired U.S. Special Agent with the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, has more than 35 years' experience as a homicide investigator. He spent several weeks in Washington investigating the Foster case.
I was hired to specifically go to Washington and make some inquiries into the circumstances surrounding the death of White House legal counsel Vincent Foster. It is my professional opinion, and I've been a homicide investigator for 35, 40 years, that the events surrounding the death were treated in such a cavalier and bizarre manner that it had to have been a cover-up. I have never in my career seen a gunshot wound into the mouth by a suicide that didn't have a tremendous amount of blowback of blood, brains, and tissue, both in the out of the mouth and the nose, the ears, and the back of the skull at the exit wound. It's a very sloppy, gory sight to see. And when a person fires a .38 caliber revolver, which the alleged weapon was, or higher caliber than that, there's a tremendous amount of gases that have no place to go inside the skull cavity, and it just blows everything out. For them to say that there was a very minor amount of blood at the scene, which is what's in the official reports, I find it hard to believe. It doesn't make any professional sense.
The Fisk report attempts to explain away the lack of blood by stating that the bullet contused the left side of the brainstem, causing instantaneous complete incapacitation, including the immediate stopping of the heart and blood flow. Noted California pathologist and gunshot wound expert Dr. Richard Mason disagrees, stating, "Certainly you can have heart activity for a minute or two following brainstem impairment." Page 52 of the Fisk report states, "Foster's body was positioned on a steep slope with his head near the top of the berm and his legs extended down the hill. As a result, when his heart stopped beating, gravity permitted the settling of blood into the lower portions of his body rather than out of the wound in his head." This statement contradicts an earlier statement on page 36 where Fisk writes, "At approximately 7:40 p.m., Dr. Donald Haupt, the Fairfax County medical examiner, arrived at the scene to examine the body. At that point, Foster's body was rolled over, and those present observed a large pool of blood located on the ground where Foster's head had been. Dr. Haupt, who was never interviewed by Fisk, vehemently denies seeing a large pool of blood on the ground." EMS technician Corey Ashford, who placed Foster's remains into a body bag, re-emphasized the lack of blood by stating he couldn't even see an exit wound. This statement led to initial reports that there was no exit wound.
The person that put Foster's body in a body bag later that night, an EMS worker, said that he didn't even have to use rubber gloves. He didn't remember even seeing an exit wound out of the back of Foster's head, and he didn't even have to wash his hands after doing this task.
This important testimony, which further reinforced the lack of blood at the scene, was omitted from the report.
The FBI did an analysis of blood tracks on Foster's head, and what they found was very interesting. There were 4 different blood tracks on Foster's head indicating that even though he had died instantly, which means he's not moaning or groaning on the ground, his head had assumed 4 separate positions.
The park police said they realized that this was a problem, but they just ignored it. They didn't deal with it. They didn't mention it in their report. They told me that they realized it was a problem, but they never discussed it. The Fisk, the pathologists, on the other hand, they recognized that this was a problem that had to be addressed. So they addressed it by saying that we conclude that one of the early observers on the scene moved the head. Now, they didn't say they had any evidence of that. They just said we conclude that because the head had been moved, and how else could it have been moved? I mean, some of the paramedic or somebody, when he checked the pulse, he probably straightened out the head. Well, the paramedic denies that he did that.
The official coroner's report depicts a large gaping 1-inch exit wound located 3 inches below the crown of Foster's head. According to Fisk, the area surrounding the body at the park was meticulously searched to a depth of 18 inches, but no brain tissue or skull fragments were found.
Another oddity that has never been explained of the crime scene is the failure of anybody during the crime scene search to find the large skull fragments that were blown out of the back of Foster's head.
Steve Neuwirth allegedly found the note torn into 27 pieces, 1 piece missing, a place where if there had been a signature, there might have been a signature. No fingerprints on it. You know, somebody tore that thing up into 28 pieces and didn't leave any fingerprints. They must have been wearing gloves when they tore it up. Kind of hot in July. I don't know why they'd be wearing gloves to tear it up, but anyway, that's very, very strange.
One of the easiest things in the world to obtain sharp fingerprints from is a piece of paper. Even the old-fashioned way of iodine fumers will bring it out even in layers and one fingerprint on top of another. And I defy anyone to tear a piece of paper into 27 pieces without using gloves, without leaving their fingerprints on it, and yet they claim there were no fingerprints on this piece of paper that was torn into 27 pieces. It's idiotic and it's a lie.
The fact of the matter is, this report has so many holes in it, you could drive a truck through it, and it isn't worth much of the paper that it's written on. And yet the media of this country has said, this is a very thorough report. It eliminates any doubt that Mr. Foster was killed someplace else, and it proves that it was a suicide.
The Fisk report we have here today is a superficial document that says a lot more about the White House and about Robert Fisk than it does Vince Foster. The American people deserve better.
The Fisk report actually was a rather huge document that they issued on June 30th, and it had a couple of hundred pages to it. When you open it up, you find out that the actual report of the investigation was only 58 pages. Almost double that number, over 100 pages in the report, were medical resumes.
The pathologist whose bios and resumes made up the bulk of the Fisk report had nothing to do with the examination of Foster and never even viewed the body.
Have you ever visited Fort Marcy Park?
No, sir.
Were you present at the Foster autopsy?
No, sir.
Have you actually examined the gun which was identified as a suicide weapon?
No, sir.
The one resume which truly mattered, that of Dr. Beyer, the pathologist who performed the autopsy on Foster, was suspiciously absent. A possible reason could be because two of Beyer's recent suicide rulings were later changed when it was revealed he purposely or accidentally missed critical evidence which pointed to homicide.
Why did Mr. Fisk's pathologists in the Vince Foster case base so much, if not all, of their findings in their report on the conclusions of a medical examiner who has been challenged not once but twice in the last 3 years for flawed autopsies and flawed reports?
One of the pieces of evidence that would tell us whether that autopsy report is accurate or not are x-rays, because the exit wound was in Foster's head and the nature of the wound and the trajectory of the wound to see if he actually had likely fired the gun himself. The autopsy report says, yes, x-rays were made. It's checked off. The Park Police report quotes the medical examiner as saying that he reviewed the x-rays and there was no evidence of metal fragments left in Foster's head. It was quite surprising to read the Fisk report to learn that indeed the x-rays were never taken, according to the Fisk report, because the medical examiner said that the machine in the medical examiner's office was broken.
Your autopsy report says you took x-rays of Mr. Foster, did you?
No, sir.
The Park Police said you told them an x-ray was taken and told them the results. How do you account for the contradiction?
I have no explanation because I did not take an x-ray.
Well, how did you tell the Park Police the results of an x-ray that you didn't take?
I don't recall telling them that statement.
Well, they do.
Well, I have no explanation.
This 76-year-old pathologist who has a history of calling murders suicides in the past has made some very inconsistent statements concerning whether Vince Foster's head was x-rayed.
I found the technician who had put in the x-ray equipment who told me that this was new equipment that had been installed in June of 1993, and that the first service call they got on it was in October of 1993. Now, Vincent Foster was killed or committed suicide on July 20th, so it seemed that the equipment was in perfect working order from the time it was installed until October, when it was simply a minor adjustment that they wanted. So obviously the people out there had been lying about the equipment being broken.
The equipment was not working, and I saw no need to take an x-ray.
You saw no need to take an x-ray?
No, sir.
Subsequent inquiries to the manufacturers of that piece of x-ray equipment said it was working perfectly before that and was working perfectly after that, and it did not have to be replaced or repaired. So somebody's lying.
Has Robert Fisk ever talked with you?
No, sir.
Robert Fisk has never talked to you?
No, sir.
If Robert Fisk had been serious in reinvestigating the circumstances surrounding the death of Vince Foster and the questions concerning x-rays and bullet fragments and pieces of the brain being missing and so forth, one of the first things he would have done, should have done, would have been to obtain a court order and exhume the body and have a re-examination, re-autopsy of the body. And that could still be done. And to me, the failure to do it is a major sign of cover-up.
For some inexplicable reason, Fisk did not use his subpoena power on the Foster case. This is absolutely critical. William F. Romer, who is the highest decorated former FBI agent in the history of the Bureau, was shocked and surprised. He said to me, and it was quoted in one of my reports, that something can be inferred from that, and that if you don't use your subpoena power and impaneling a grand jury, that you could come up with a very different result, and you may not come to the truth.
One of the biggest mistakes, and I don't think it was a mistake, I think it was intentional, acts that was committed by the special counsel was a failure to convene a federal grand jury and subpoena these people and place them under oath with the specter of prosecution for perjury if they didn't tell all. He gave them a license to be vague or to lie because of no threat.
One of the most ominous of all inconsistencies involves Bill Clinton's conflicting versions of his final conversation with Foster. When first asked, Clinton said he couldn't remember when he last spoke with Foster or what was discussed. When he was asked a second time, he claimed he spoke with Foster Sunday night, 2 days before his death. Clinton redrafted his story a third time, changing the date of his call to Monday, the night before Foster's death. According to Time magazine, at this point, Clinton still maintained he was unaware of Foster's depression. When the White House press office announced depression as the reason behind Foster's suicide, Clinton then redrafted a fourth version, claiming the purpose of this call was to cheer up his friend. The question becomes not if Clinton lied, but why he lied. Within minutes of the verification of Foster's identity, the Park Police issued orders to seal Foster's office at the White House. David Watkins, Clinton's administrative assistant, assured the police he would take care of it. He lied.
Instead of sealing Foster's office, you asked Watkins to do it. Now, it is my understanding you called Watkins the night of Foster's death and asked him to do this, and he said he would.
As I said, before I left the notification scene, I asked for him to ensure that that was done.
But he didn't.
Immediately, high-ranking members of Bill and Hillary's staff began ransacking Foster's office, removing important and possibly incriminating documents. The people entering the office included Bernard Nussbaum, counsel to the president, Patsy Thomason, White House administration director, and former assistant to cocaine distributor Dan Lassiter, and Margaret Williams, Hillary Clinton's chief of staff.
Why was the office not sealed until 11 a.m. the next morning? Did Bernie Nussbaum, Patsy Thomason, and Maggie Williams know about the order not to go in there because it was supposed to be sealed? And how did they learn in the first place about Vince Foster's death? Did somebody order Nussbaum, Thomason, and Williams to search Vince Foster's office, or did one of them make the decision to search the office?
The first thing that any agency conducting an investigation of a man in that position should have done is seal his car, seal his office, and seal his home until a thorough search was made. People went in and ransacked his office, absconded with documents, which is a felony to interfere in the conduct of a federal investigation, even an incompetent one. And no one seems to care.
the Park Police were not allowed access to those papers. The FBI was not allowed access to those papers. The Secret Service was not allowed access to those papers. Instead, 8 or 9 attorneys on the White House personnel went in ahead.
And those people should be brought to task for it. And they should be subpoenaed, put under oath, and with the threat of prosecution of tampering with the crime scene, they should be forced to explain why they did it, who ordered them to do it, and what they did with the evidence.
On April 22, 1994, Hillary Clinton stated she had no knowledge of the raid on Foster's office.
Why did your chief of staff, Maggie Williams, why was she among those who removed the documents from his office within days?
I don't think that she did remove any documents.
At the Whitewater hearings, Margaret Williams stated under oath that Hillary had ordered her to bring files taken from Foster's office that night to her. Either Williams is guilty of perjury, or Hillary is guilty of obstruction of justice, as well as lying to the American people.
On Mrs. Clinton's instructions, I believe, she took them to the private quarters, the Clinton's quarters at the White House, where they were kept for safety. And if it was done on Mrs. Clinton's orders, that could involve her in the obstruction of justice.
Now, 2 days later, evidently they didn't get everything out of there they wanted, because on July 22nd, 1993, Mr. Nussbaum and other White House officials went into Mr. Foster's office a second time. The FBI agents and the Park Police were ordered to sit on chairs out in the hall while the White House staff went through these documents. And Mr. Nussbaum gave the FBI and the Park Police no indication of what he was taking. One FBI agent stood up to look in the room, and he was reprimanded and told to sit down.
Again, I just want to, we didn't search. Again, we're told to sit down, and I'm not sure how many people were there, 8 to 11 maybe, White House personnel, who searched the office for reasons of national security, I guess, and decided what would be able for us to be looked at. And then that material was turned over to the family attorney. And after he had it for a day or so, then we were allowed to look at it.
The raid on Foster's office was kept secret for 5 months until the Washington Times broke the story in December of 1993. The White House then announced that Whitewater files had been taken from Foster's office. The White House had intentionally directed the media's and the public's attention towards Whitewater, an area the Clintons felt they could handle.
When this is all over, it's going to be the same story we've been telling for 2 years. We made a bad investment, we lost money, and there's really not much more to add to it.
At the same time, the attention was diverted away from more serious secrets, which Foster's office may have held.
I believe they were frightened to death that if a proper investigation was conducted, it would disclose improper actions of people in the White House back in Arkansas, events that Vince Foster had knowledge of, and the White House may have participated in a cover-up of its own, separate from the murder, simply to keep a series of nasty events involving laundered money and covert operations down in Mena, Arkansas, from becoming public. The Arkansas National Guard, when Bill Clinton was governor, was deeply involved in covert operations down in Mena, Arkansas, and Bill Clinton was their commander. And there is strong indications that some of the laundered money from these covert operations wound up being laundered through the Arkansas Treasury and through ADFA. And Vince Foster would have been close enough to that as the confidant of the president that the trail of the motive for someone killing him would have probably led back to Little Rock.
The raid on Foster's office and the ensuing Whitewater scandal led to calls for a special prosecutor to investigate. Robert Fisk was chosen, although his previous ties to Clinton were never made public.
Robert Fisk Law Firm represented the company that sold the land to Bill Clinton's Whitewater Partnership. What's more, Robert Fisk also worked with President Clinton's lawyer in the Paula Jones sexual harassment case, Robert Bennett. They worked together in a case involving the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, also known as BCCI. BCCI was a scandal-plagued $10 billion bank failure that has been implemented in alleged wrongdoing involving the Arkansas phase of Whitewater, which Robert Fisk has banned us from even talking about here today.
Fisk proceeded to collect massive volumes of testimony and documents, making sure the public was never made aware of their content. Meanwhile, the Rose law firm in Arkansas was busy shredding Vince Foster's files.
Jeremy Hedges, a part-time courier at the Rose law firm, told a grand jury that he was told to shred documents from the files of Vince Foster after Special Prosecutor Robert Fisk had announced he would look into Foster's death. That's impeding justice. Wouldn't Vince Foster's former colleagues at the firm want to cooperate in every way with an investigation into their friend's death? Wouldn't Bill and Hillary want to?
Can you tell us what you know about stories about shredding of Whitewater documents down in Arkansas?
Nothing.
At the gubernatorial mansion?
Oh, that didn't happen, and I know nothing about any other such stories.
You know nothing about documents relating to Whitewater ever shredded anywhere that you know about or authorized or didn't authorize?
Absolutely not.
The American people's outrage over the escalating cover-ups resulted in Washington, D.C. being inundated with calls to hold congressional hearings. Every possible attempt to block or delay the hearings was made. Finally, they were allowed to go forward on the condition that no relevant information be presented to the American people.
The gentleman is really out of order. He's outside of the scope of this inquiry.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if we're going to get the truth of things, we have to be able to ask questions. I don't think I'm out of the scope. We're here to search for the truth, and Mr. Nussbaum has a job to do, and we've got a job to do, and quite frankly, that gavel's not allowing us to do our job.
Well,
so I would repeat my question, saying, is it possible that Mr. Foster had documents in this office regarding Madison Guaranteed Whitewater or Clinton's role in that?
The chair has advised the witnesses that they do not have to respond to questions that are outside the scope of this hearing. The gentleman's question is, inasmuch as I have explained repeatedly, that this has to do with observing the integrity of the ongoing unfinished investigation of that portion of the Washington investigation of Mr. Fisk's tour.
Mr. Chairman, you heard before where Mr. Nussbaum says, I've got a job to do, and I said, I've got a job to do. My job is to the American taxpayers.
Well, yes,
I mean, there were 60 million, if I may be permitted, there were $60 million that were lost in Madison
well, the
Guarantee,
gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman,
and the gentleman is
fair.
not unique in being the only one that's charged with discharging his duty. Every one of us is.
That's not fair. That's a
well,
heavy
the
gavel,
gentleman is out of
not
order.
Allowing us to do our job.
His time has expired. He's out of order, and the chair must proceed.
These hearings begin with the investigation of Vincent Foster's suicide, and that should turn the stomach of any caring American.
Somehow, here is the United States Senate giving credence to the most insulting, degrading, lurid, and lunatic theories that people could invent.
The Park Police, the FBI, the medical examiners, the independent counsel, they're all professionals, and they did their job and concluded that Vince Foster did indeed commit suicide. It's sad and tragic, but we should let his family celebrate his many accomplishments and not dwell on the circumstances of his death. And I agree with Senator Dodd that it does indeed border on the macabre.
I hope we can all agree that there's no place in this hearing room for lurid speculation about the tragic circumstances surrounding the suicide of Vincent Foster. The independent counsel has spoken on this issue. The Justice Department and the Park Police have concurred.
The exploitation of Vincent Foster's death by those who want to hurt this presidency is one of the saddest chapters in our recent political history.
There is absolutely no credible evidence to contradict the Fisk report's conclusion that Vincent Foster took his own life and that it happened at Fort Marcy Park.
Despite the intentional omission and cover-up of evidence supporting homicide, the Fisk report was unanimously praised by not only the national media, but by the White House, the Department of Justice, and nearly all members of Congress. It appears now the level of corruption in the federal government has reached unprecedented heights.
I would think that the American public would become a little incensed at a tendency of the national media to assist in cover-ups of this type of thing instead of just accepting them at face value. The national media has made extraordinary efforts to downplay this investigation of Vince Foster and to accept this ludicrous Fisk report.
And I'd like to say to any media that might be paying attention, why aren't you asking these questions instead of just taking this thing at face value?
The national media is so controlled in the United States. They are wimps who go along with the power structure of the country and assist in cover-ups by acts of omission and failing to do their duty. And when they accepted the Fisk report at face value, when it's so blatantly inconsistent with the facts.
On the same day as the release of the Fisk report, Bill Clinton signed into law the reauthorization of the Independent Counsel Act in hopes of retaining the services of Robert Fisk. In signing it, he referred to the act as a foundation stone for the trust between the government and our citizens. Clinton's plan, however, may have backfired. Robert Fisk was fired August 5, 1994, and replaced by Kenneth Starr. In the historic November 1994 elections, the American people, weary of the cover-ups, voted the Republicans into office in Washington, hoping to see justice prevail. Their victory, however, was short-lived. Republican Senator D'Amato from New York, who had promised that full, unrestricted hearings would begin within the first 100 days of the new Congress, went back on his promise.
The American public has a clear and pressing right to know how Foster died and the circumstances of the death and the possible motivation for either a suicide or potentially a homicide.
If it was a close friend of mine, I would have every rock turned over in Washington, D.C. to get the truth out. Bill Clinton just shrugged his shoulders and said, well, we regret that it happened and we won't know why he killed himself. Well, why don't they look?
There is really no way to know why these things happen. And it is very important that his life not be judged simply by how it ended. I don't think there is anything more to know. I don't think there is anything else.
It doesn't make any sense to me. I hope it doesn't make any sense to my colleagues. You know, Lincoln said, let the people know the facts and the country will be saved. How about a few facts on this?
But when the heat of controversy swarms around you, the inner conviction that you did the right thing will be the best salve and the best sleeping medicine.
George Bush dresses up. Right here. We got him on tape.
Let's send that spell over.
Sir, everything. I don't owe you this comment.
I know. I appreciate it.
This is what's called ambush journalism, and I disrespect you for that as well. So thank you
ever
and goodbye.
been in the ritual?
That's none of your damn business.
Oh.
Trey.
Our story begins in Northern California over 100 years ago, when locals began to spread rumors of bizarre occult rituals being conducted in the ancient redwood groves of Sonoma County. As the decades passed, it became clear these incredible stories had a basis in truth, and their source was a 2,700-acre private club known as the Bohemian Grove. Then, in a time period between the mid-1970s and the early 1990s, scores of reporters attempted to infiltrate the Grove. All attempts were unsuccessful. Grove security identified them, threw them out for trespassing, or in some cases, had the local police arrest them. To many, it seemed the Grove's secrets would never become public. All of that changed on July 15th, 2000, when we ripped aside the veil of secrecy and were successfully able to penetrate the Bohemian Grove on their high holy day and videotape the cremation of care ritual. Our infiltration is chronicled in my documentary film, Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove. A British documentary film company, World of Wonder, also covered our investigation.
In the weeks that followed, Alex streamed his footage on his website and released it as a sell-through video. Everywhere I looked, the internet was aflame with news of the daring raid.
As the news spread across the planet that the Bohemian Grove had been blown wide open and that their secrets were public, the people were amazed. They were amazed to learn that many U.S. presidents and British prime ministers, German chancellors, the Hollywood elite, the heads of business and academia, Federal Reserve chairmen were traveling to the Grove each year, and that presidents had been going there since the turn of the last century in 1900. They were shocked by each new revelation of ritualistic depravity. This film is about what we've learned in the 5 years since we infiltrated the Grove. And it's about the response that we've gotten from Grove members, the press, and even local activists in the area who've been protesting the Grove for over 25 years. Finally, we learned that the Grove was only one chapter in a larger, worldwide secret society hell-bent on bringing in a one-world government. What would the people do if they knew that the majority of the leaders in the corporate world, as well as government, were deep occultists? Before the year 2000 and our successful penetration of the Grove, the mainstream media denied that rituals were indeed taking place there and said that elite from all over the world were simply meeting in secret to have a good time. After the footage we had shot of the cremation of care ritual aired first in England and then in the United States on national TV, the mainstream media changed their tune. The San Francisco Chronicle had previously refused to report on the Grove. After our infiltration, they wrote as many as 5 articles a year detailing the bizarre activities that were taking place inside the Grove, including the fact that top presidential advisor Karl Rove had tapped Arnold Schwarzenegger inside the Grove to run for governor on California's recall ballot. Even the vaunted New York Times reported on the Bohemian Grove, but attacked us for sneaking in. The New York Post was one of many national publications to report on all of the homosexual activities going on at the Grove. The Post reported in its page 6 gossip column that Chad Savage, gay porno star, was, quote, servicing the moguls at the Grove. But a disturbing theme ran through the body of the reportage. Okay, it's true. The elite meet behind closed doors, and there's gay porn stars and gay prostitutes being shipped in like beluga caviar. What's the big deal? Let's just let them have their privacy. And so they have lakeside chats calling for world government. Really, they're not bad people. And so was Adolf Hitler's well-known obsession with dark mysticism. Adolf Hitler belonged to the pre-Nazi death cult, the Thule Society, as well as the Thule Society. Both groups trace their lineage back to the Order of Death, founded in 1776 in Ingolstadt University in Bavaria, Germany. Then, of course, it spread to the U.S. with the founding of Skull and Bones.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go wild.
I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look forward...
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, a secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret. I disagree with this president's direction.
Aleister Crowley, who dubbed himself the Beast and the most evil man alive, was a fellow traveler with some of the most powerful people in British society, including prominent royals. The Church of Satan, the Temple of Set, the OTO, the Golden Dawn, Skull and Bones, Bohemian Grove, the Blue Lodge, the Scottish Rite, the 33rd Degree. It seems like there are hundreds of different occultic groups, but all they are different denominations in the same religion, the Egyptian and Babylonian mystery schools. Albert Pike, who was the supreme Grand Mason of the entire world, founded the Ku Klux Klan. But you don't hear Jesse Jackson calling for his statue to be removed in Washington, D.C. Why is that? Because Jesse Jackson is a 33rd degree Mason. Now don't get me wrong, most Masons are what high-level occultists call porch Masons or outsiders. They themselves are considered neophytes by those in the inner circle or those nearer the top of the pyramid. They're compartmentalized. They believe that their great work, as they call it, is to help society. But in reality, they're being controlled and manipulated. The Knights of the Secret Circle, the Knights of the Golden Circle. This is what high-level KKK members call themselves. But even low-level KKK members do not understand that the KKK itself is part of a larger Masonic organization. Most Masons detest the Klan, but they've never looked on their own temple walls at the paintings of Albert Pike that adorn them and ask themselves why the founder of the Klan is hanging in their temple. This is the power of hidden in plain view, a favorite trick of Luciferians. Where did this dark thinking start? This black spirituality? The central thread goes back to ancient Egypt and Babylon with the mystery schools. They knew that knowledge is power. And so secret societies were formed to guard the secrets of medicine, architecture, government, agriculture. Secret societies are nothing more than the first intelligence agencies. Knowledge had to be guarded, but over time, elites abused their control of the knowledge and used it to dominate their populations. And these same sciences of control are being used today. That's why the elite today relishes secrecy. They know that it is the fount of their power. They seek to dumb down the population, not just to hoard their secret knowledge to make us even more mindless, more domesticated, like braying sheep to the slaughter. Their religion is the science of sophistry, the science of the con artist, the science of the despot, the dictator, the tyrant, the controller, the charlatan, the liar. They come to kill, steal, and destroy. They are parasites. They are anathema to free, dynamic human societies. Know your enemy. Stand up for love and life and family and resist the New World Order and the Babylonian slave state our enemies are attempting to construct.
I want to tell everybody out in TV land how they can come to the Grove, where their elected leaders, along with the big bankers and the heads of media, meet, along with some European royalty, every year to decide how to run the country. You can fly into San Francisco, or you can fly into Santa Rosa. You can even fly into Sacramento, and you just drive out to Highway 101. You take Highway 12 out west towards the coast. You get about 10 miles out from the coast, right outside the little town of Monterey. And the town of Monterey, off the main drag, you'll take the Bohemian Avenue. And it dead ends right here at the 2,700-acre Redwood Grove entrance, where your world leaders, among other things, set policy for much of the planet and dress up in black and red robes and worship, Moloch.
To purchase additional copies of this film, or to see dozens of other films and important books, be sure and visit Infowars.com or PrisonPlanet.com. Or to order, simply call toll-free 1-888-253-3139. Our leaders have told us that the war on terror may last 100 years. The new kind of war against a shadowy enemy that can never be defeated.
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Generation after generation will have to lay down its liberty in an endless war for global empire.
It was a breathtaking display of firepower.
And the Pentagon says, we ain't seen nothing yet.
The perfect specter to convince populations to relinquish their liberty in the name of security.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
And if he does not disarm, the United States of America will lead a coalition and disarm him in the name of peace.
We've been told that we're facing a 100-year war that will last generation after generation. In this film, we will explore who pulls the strings and who benefits from the dark spectacle of modern warfare. We will answer the question, do the people know how they are controlled? Do they understand the systems of power that surround them? The modern propaganda machines of public relations that wash their brains and fill their minds full of ball games and mindless fluff? Is the population beginning to realize that governments throughout history have used the specter of fear to drive their populations into acquiescing to total tyranny? September 11th, national ID cards, Big Brother, the Iraq War, the 7/7 bombings in London, the invasion of Iran. How are they all interconnected? In previous films, we have focused predominantly on September 11th as the foundational event, the pretext for the current geopolitical structure.
The smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
National polls show that most Americans and Westerners believe the official story of 9/11 to be a fraud. And a large part of that majority believes that 9/11 was an inside job. But the establishment press continues to contest any alternative view concerning 9/11. In this documentary, we will first look at historical events that are not contested, events where the fact of government-sponsored terror is not debated, but in fact openly admitted to by Western governments. There are literally hundreds of examples of government-sponsored terrorism in modern history, or what are known as false flag operations. We're going to start by looking at just 5 past examples, then we'll look at several modern cases. What is a false flag?
The encyclopedia definition reads, false flag operations are covert operations conducted by governments, corporations, or by other organizations which are designed to appear as if they were carried out by other entities. The name is derived from the military concept of flying false colors, that is, flying the flag of a country other than your own. There are many variants of false flag operations, but one of the most popular carried out by governments is to stage a terror attack or horrible criminal incident and then blame it on your political enemies. One of the best-known cases of a false flag op was carried out by the newly elected Adolf Hitler on February 27, 1933. Nazi documents uncovered at the end of World War II, as well as testimony during the Nuremberg trials, reveal what many historians already suspected, that Hermann Göring had set fire to the Reichstag, the German parliament building. The Nazis then produced their patsy, Marinus van der Lubbe, an extremely mentally handicapped young man who was found rolling around in an alley behind the Reichstag naked. Van der Lubbe was then taken before a Nazi show trial, found guilty, and sentenced to death. He was beheaded on January 10, 1934. Using the crisis he had created to pass laws similar to the USA Patriot Act, Hitler became dictator and set his sights on the world. By March of 1939, Hitler had already seized Czechoslovakia. Having gained both Austria and Czechoslovakia, Hitler desired to move east against Poland. But he did not want to look like the aggressor. Hitler needed an excuse for attacking Poland. It was Heinrich Himmler who came up with a plan. Thus, the operation was codenamed Operation Himmler. On the night of August 31st, 1939, the Germans took an unknown prisoner from one of the concentration camps, dressed him in a Polish uniform, took him to the town of Gleiwitz on the German-Polish border, and then shot him. The staged scene with the dead prisoner dressed in a Polish uniform was supposed to appear as a Polish attack against the German radio station. German radio, newspapers, and newsreels were flooded with images of what appeared to be a dead Polish soldier who had dared attack the Reich. Now Hitler had his excuse to invade Poland, and the nightmare of World War II had begun. In 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency, working in tandem with MI6, overthrew the democratically elected leader of Iran, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh had been educated in the West, was pro-America, and had driven communist forces out of the north of his country shortly after being elected in 1951. Mossadegh then nationalized the oil fields and denied British Petroleum a monopoly. The CIA's own history department at CIA.gov details how U.S. and British intelligence agents carried out terror attacks and then subsequently blamed them on Mossadegh. In the late 1990s, large sections of Operation Ajax were declassified. The field commander of Operation Ajax was none other than the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, Kermit Roosevelt. Before his death in 2000, Roosevelt went public to the media, bragging about his patriotism in carrying out terror attacks in Iran and blaming it on the government. The provocations included propaganda, demonstrations, bribery, agents of influence, and false flag operations. They bombed the home of a prominent religious leader and blamed it on Mossadegh. They attacked mosques, machine gun crowds, and then handed out thousands of handbills claiming that Mossadegh had done it. The handbills read, "Up with Mossadegh, up with communism, down with Allah." Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh was incarcerated for the duration of his life. He fared better than many of his ministers who were executed just days after the successful coup for crimes that MI6 and CIA had committed. The CIA then formed the dreaded Iranian Secret Police, or SAVAK, and a 25-year reign of terror and torture then commenced. The operation was seen by Western intelligence agencies as a huge success. The CIA then successfully used the exact same technique in scores of countries to overthrow elected governments and dictators alike. Operation Gladio is an umbrella name for literally hundreds of bombings carried out by Western intelligence agencies and NATO in Italy, Western Europe, the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia. From 1947 until 1981, Italian presidents have gone public admitting Operation Gladio targeted innocent civilians and was to be blamed on leftists and communists. On November 22, 1990, the European Parliament had a resolution condemning the activities of Operation Gladio. The former Italian intelligence chief has come clean concerning Gladio's actions as well. Many other countries have declassified documents concerning Gladio. It is part of the public record that our government and other Western governments targeted trains, buses, schools. Several times, operatives zeroed in on school buses, knowing that images of dead children would get the population hopping mad and ready to relinquish their liberties. A particularly bloody bombing at the central station of Bologna, Italy, on the morning of August 2, 1980, which killed 85 people and wounded more than 200, caused some Italian officials to break their silence and begin to expose just a small part of this wicked operation. And now the Gulf of Tonkin incident. In the summer of 1964, President Lyndon Baines Johnson needed a pretext to commit the American people to the already expanding covert war in Southeast Asia.
3 communist PT boats attacked an American destroyer off the coast of Vietnam yesterday, and today President Johnson's response was hard and tough.
To any armed attack upon our forces, we shall reply. To any in Southeast Asia who ask our help in defending their freedom, we shall give it.
In November of 2001, the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum released tapes of phone conversations with the President and then Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, where they openly discussed plans to use the staged Gulf of Tonkin incident as a pretext to expand the war. Then, in late 2005, the National Security Agency declassified its own official history of the Gulf of Tonkin and admitted that intelligence agency officers had deliberately skewed the intelligence and claimed that Vietnamese patrol boats had attacked U.S. destroyers on August 4, 1964, when in reality they had done nothing, even while being fired on by U.S. forces. Congress then authorized the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. The Tonkin Lie paved the way for 58,000 American deaths and over 1.5 million dead Vietnamese. On October 6, 1976, 2 time bombs made of C-4 planted on a Douglas DC-8 aircraft exploded, killing all 73 people on board in the most deadly act of airline terrorism in the Western Hemisphere until September 11, 2001. The plane was carrying Olympic athletes from 3 countries, including gold medal winners from Cuba. Declassified FBI and CIA documents show that the convicted bombers of the flight had been given U.S. visas just days before the attack, and that they were in the employ of the U.S. government. This had been reported on in respected publications for years, but has now been confirmed by multiple declassifications. Cuban plane bomber was CIA agent. Declassified U.S. government documents show that a man suspected of involvement in the bombing of a Cuban passenger plane worked for the CIA. Luis Posada Carrillos. In the early 1960s, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Ella Lemonster, concocted a plan for false flag operations as a pretext to invade Cuba and for war with the Soviet Union. In Operation Northwoods, they planned to hijack jets by remote control, crash them, and blame the attack on Cuba. There were many other terrorist attacks they planned to carry out that were contained within the document. One scenario mentioned was the destruction of a U.S. naval vessel that was to be blamed on a foreign power as a pretext for war with any enemy they picked. President Lyndon Baines Johnson went operational with Northwoods on June 8, 1967 during the Six-Day War. During the Six-Day War between Israel and the Arab nations, the USS Liberty was sent by Johnson to collect electronic intelligence in the eastern Mediterranean. The clearly marked U.S. intelligence ship was 14 miles off the coast of Israel in international waters.
A short time after the air attack had been completed, the 3 torpedo boats approached us from our starboard quarter at high speed and in an apparent torpedo launch attitude.
Israeli surveillance aircraft flew low over the ship and clearly identified it as an American vessel. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, the USS Liberty was attacked by 3 Mirage 3 fighter bombers. From the onset of the attack, the fighter bombers were jamming U.S. signals. Not only were they jamming U.S. signals specifically, they were also unmarked, the only unmarked aircraft in Israel's arsenal. The fighter bombers strafed the ships with their cannons, dropped conventional munitions and napalm on the ship, repeatedly from stem to stern. After the Mirages had done their work, the ship was hit by medium bomber Dassault Missiles carrying napalm and other munitions like white phosphorus. The USS Liberty was then attacked by 3 Israeli torpedo boats bearing Israeli flags. The torpedo gunboats opened fire with high-caliber machine guns and launched torpedoes. A single torpedo struck the ship, blowing a hole in both sides, entering the ship and leaving a 30-foot exit hole when it exploded. Then the torpedo boats began strafing life rafts in the water, an international war crime. While all of this was happening, the oversized American flag flew clearly above the ship. The attack on the Liberty went on for hour after hour after hour. During the entire attack, the USS Liberty continually called the Sixth Fleet that was nearby, begging for air support or rescue. 2 aircraft carriers in the Med responded by launching fighter aircraft. Unbelievably, they were recalled by the White House. Rear Admiral Geist, then commanding the carriers in the Sixth Fleet, called Washington personally to confirm the recall order. Secretary of Defense McNamara came on the line, and then President Johnson himself told Geist, "I want that goddamn ship going to the bottom. No help. Recall the wings." Imagine being Admiral Geist begging the president to allow you to defend an American ship that's under attack and being told by him that he wants the ship going to the bottom. Despite the fact that the U.S. carriers withdrew their help, a Russian spy ship appeared and witnessed part of the attack. After 3 hours into the attack, the Israelis withdrew because there were witnesses, allowing the damaged USS Liberty to limp to safety. 40 years after the attack on the USS Liberty, we know exactly what happened. I've interviewed former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Thomas Moorer. I've interviewed the admirals that were on the line who heard what President Johnson said. I've even talked to the head JAG officer of the Navy who was ordered to falsify the reports and cover up what had really happened. One of the Israeli pilots has gone public as well, saying that 3 times he refused over his radio to headquarters to attack the ship, saying clearly that it was an American ship in international waters and an ally. He was ordered under threat of court-martial to engage the ship. In a nutshell, this is what happened. President Johnson had personal control over the ship, parked it in the Mediterranean, made a backroom deal with Israel to attack it with an order to kill all aboard. Then the attack on the ship was to be blamed on Egypt. The U.S. would enter the war and take over the entire Middle East. In the aftermath of the attack on the most highly decorated ship in U.S. history, the captain and his entire crew were told they would spend life in prison or be killed if they told anyone what happened. Captain William L. McGonigal was given the Congressional Medal of Honor in secret and told not to tell anyone that he had won the award.
Now, Dick Cheney
And John Bolton and others have been saying Iran poses an immediate danger. They could get a nuclear weapon before we know it. All the same things they said about Iraq. And so we have to do something about that now.
You know, he said the same thing about Iraq, and it, like you said, he was caught red-handed. It's proven to be lies. Why should we believe him about Iran?
I'm pleased to tell you, American people, that the National Intelligence Estimate just put out on Iran says that Iran cannot possibly have a nuclear weapon for 10 more years. Let me say that one more time. Iran can't be a nuclear power, weapons-wise, for 10 more years.
We have to look at whether our governments are creating enemies so that they can justify what they do. Of course, two of the biggest funders of American presidential campaigns are the oil industry and the arms industry. And it's in their interests that we invade places like Iraq.
We're going to let the Israelis, or we're going to do it ourselves, attack the nuclear facilities in Iran. Now, people say, that's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. I agree. The problem is, folks, the people running our policy toward Iraq and Iran were widely known in the 1980s when I was briefing the Vice President and others as the crazies, okay? The crazy. You come in on Monday morning and somebody would say, guess what the crazies did late Friday night? And you'd know exactly who the reference was. It was to Wolfowitz, it was to Pearl. So all the same folks, some of them who have deserted the sinking ship like proverbial rats, okay? But it was Feith, Wolfowitz, and the rest of them. They were the crazies.
There's a lot of other people that are have a dissenting opinion about this war, and has another view of this war other than Cindy Sheehan, and other people have lost sons in this war and daughters. She needs to really go home and do this little protest some other way besides trying to make things sound like she's the only voice of America.
3 weeks later, this gentleman and many others got their wish. Free speech was banned for hundreds of square miles around Bush's Crawford Ranch. Now you can only protest on private property or designated free speech zones where no one can even see your protest.
Look, tourist stuff's popped up here now. Let freedom ring.
We decided to cap off our day in Crawford by traveling down the public highway to where the Secret Service had blocked off the public road 2 miles before the entrance to Bush's ranch. We were promptly told, as if America is now a third world police state, to get out of there, despite the fact that we were credentialed press.
You need to get back in your car and continue.
Really?
Yeah, you have to get off the road.
Oh, we're off the road, okay. Or is it all right to stand over here?
Past your cars where you can stand.
Oh, but the barricades are here.
So let me get this straight. You believe that the U.S. government crashed those airplanes into the World Trade Center?
Yes, the evidence shows it.
You're full of Take a hike.
The whole point about 9/11 is that it gave a pretext for a preconceived plan. That plan is in the PNAC document, which precedes 9/11 by almost a year.
It became clear to us that the administration was using the corruption of intelligence to justify a war that need not happen.
In my opinion, when you look at the details of 9/11 and you read reports that there were planes that supposedly contained terrorists but did not take off that day, and that the Flight 93, for example, was supposed to be aimed at either Capitol Hill or the White House, you're in fact looking at a coup d'etat, that they wanted to destroy the infrastructure of American government.
There are a host of unanswered questions on all of this. The reason they're unanswered is because this president, this administration, will not answer the questions.
Why is it that perhaps the biggest question of all, why is it that after, on 9/11, 8:20 a.m., when it was undoubtedly without any question that one of those planes had been hijacked, between 8:20 and 9:38 when the Pentagon was hit, an hour and 20 minutes, no US airplane was put into the air.
There were drills on the day of 9/11 in which the American Defense Force was supposed to be dealing with mock hijackings. Obviously, those would have slowed down the response of national defense to the hijacked airliners. If American passenger jets go off course and they are tackled by American fighter jets, the default position is to shoot them down. And yet in this case, of course, none of that happened.
There was the Andrew Air Force Base 10 miles from Washington. It has a squadron of F-16 fighters. None of those was put into the air. This is absolutely almost incredible. The most powerful military technological country in the world, albeit under a terrifying attack, was not able to put planes into the air, which actually could probably have stopped at least the second and third hits.
And we've got to ask why George Bush sat there with a group of school children for 16 minutes after he'd been alerted to a plane going into the second tower.
The president's in Sarasota. He's told that the second plane has hit the World Trade Center. And the Secret Service guy immediately says, "We're out of here." The president stays for 30 minutes, folks, for 30 minutes. Now, how do you explain that? I've talked to all manner of Secret Service people. They say, "We're out of here" was exactly the right reaction. Everyone knew where the president was. If not the president, you might have had some concern for these little kids. Why did he stay for 30 minutes? Why was he countermanded?
The implication, of course, is he knew exactly what was going on, that he knew that he wasn't under attack.
I think all of this needs to be explained. It wasn't in the congressional report. There was no serious examination of this. And there is the amazing statement made in the official congressional report that the American authorities have not managed to trace the source of the funding. And then the most amazingly disingenuous statement ultimately is it of little consequence. It is of massive consequence. The head of Pakistani intelligence at the ISI, Lieutenant Mahmoud Ahmed, requested Omar Sheikh, who is a well-known Islamic extremist who is now actually in prison in Pakistan, to wire $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, who was the lead hijacker. It is absolutely astonishing that that lead has never been followed up. As it happened, General Mahmoud was actually on a visit to the United States, both before and just after 9/11. And saw many leading government officials.
For people to dismiss these questioners as conspiratorial advocates or conspiratorial theorists, that's completely out of line, because the questions remain because the president, who should be able to answer them, will not.
We have plenty of evidence that the attack on Afghanistan was planned. Because after the negotiations with the Taliban broke down in the United States, I think they went to Houston in Texas in about July, and there were later discussions at about this time in Berlin, where US officials made absolutely clear to the Taliban representatives in this famous phrase, either we will provide you with a carpet of gold, in other words, if you supply a pipeline across Afghanistan, you ensure the security of the country, you guard that pipeline, then we can do a deal with you, otherwise we will bury you in a carpet of bombs.
In the years since 9/11, scores of highly regarded individuals have gone public to express their serious doubts about 9/11. These include former presidential advisor and CIA analyst Ray McGovern, the father of Reaganomics and former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, BYU physics professor Stephen Jones, former German Defense Minister Andres von Bülow, former MI5 officer David Shayler, former Blair cabinet member Michael Meacher, former chief economist for the Department of Labor during President George W. Bush's first term, Dr. Morgan Reynolds, and many more. In early June of 2006, we traveled to Chicago to meet with fellow 9/11 truth seekers and expose the official story as a fraud.
You cannot hide the truth. You will not hide the truth. It's coming out. Your crimes are coming out. Ladies and gentlemen, 9/11 is an inside job. It's a self-inflicted war. It's a government false flag terror operation. Research it. More people are waking up every single day. More people realize what the stakes are. They love their families, and they understand that the government is carrying out terrorist attacks as a pretext to re-engineer America into a police state. Why? To capture us, to be their political slaves, to use us as an engine of global empire, to invade the planet.
And we aren't going to solve our problems by ignoring 9/11. The biggest smoking gun then and now is WTC-7. How can anyone watch it without some kind of a psyop or verbiage accompanying it and not look at that and say, hey, that building was just demolished, just the way the Las Vegas Sands was, or the Seattle Stadium, etc. Just there's no way around that. Here we are in so-called broad daylight. It's 5:20 p.m. and we've got cameras on it. And what other explanation can there be for this very conventional-looking collapse when under 7 seconds? There's just, that just has crime, inside job written all over it. We need real convictions. We need arrests. We need prosecutions.
We also had a chance to speak to Professor Stephen Jones, who is a doctor of physics, concerning new bombshell evidence that conclusively proves that thermite was used to cut the main pillars in the World Trade Center towers.
There is this molten metal, molten material flowing out of the South Tower just before its collapse. It has a large quantity of yellow hot metal. And then I read about these pools of molten metal underneath both towers and Building 7 after their collapses. Now that fits like a glove with the thermite reaction, which produces molten iron. You also see in these videos of this molten metal coming up, you see this white ash, this dust that comes off. Now that combination, yellow hot molten metal, white ash floating away, that's his signature characteristic for thermite. And then finally, we got some samples of this metal, the previously molten metal. Using advanced techniques like proton-induced X-ray emission and an electron microprobe, we found out what's in these samples. We're finding iron, also sulfur, potassium, and manganese. And these are characteristic of a variation of thermite, which is used to cut through steel very rapidly. It's called thermate. It's like, sure, you can take a knife, you take the butter out of the fridge, and you cut through that butter. Now, adding sulfur to thermite and also potassium permanganate, these chemicals, it's like heating up your knife to a very high temperature. Now it slices right through the butter. Even if the butter is cold, slices right through. Same way here, by adding sulfur and potassium permanganate to thermite, it'll now slice through structural steel very rapidly. But the end products then, you'll have sulfur, and potassium, manganese, and iron. And that's what we see. Thermite had to be planted in the buildings, which of course implies directly an inside job. Someone had to have access into the buildings.
Since the first days of 9/11, the establishment press has only focused on the Pentagon controversy and not the hundreds of other smoking guns and serious questions that have been raised. We have to ask ourselves, why? As if it was by design, the new frames only intensified the debate. No passenger plane is evident in the still frames. They're more than happy to endlessly focus on the Pentagon, but they won't touch Building 7.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
We have the owner of the World Trade Center complex admitting on tape that he ordered the building demolished on the afternoon of 9/11.
I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
"9/11 was just one salvo in an ongoing war against the free peoples of the planet. It's all part of their terror storm." Pentagon war planners now publicly admit that 90% of their battle plans are psychological versus physical.
The information war has taken the place of aircraft carriers, fighter bombers, and Abrams M1A tanks. And you, the population of the planet, are the target. Put simply, modern warfare is all about selling the population to love its own enslavement. The elite are waging war on the people. Edward L. Bernays is regarded by many as the father of public relations. He was born in Vienna, Austria. Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Bernays pioneered the use of psychology and other social sciences to design public persuasion campaigns. He published several scholarly works, still used in universities worldwide today. On page 71 of his book Propaganda, Bernays wrote, "If we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing about it?" Bernays literally wrote the book on modern propaganda. His clients included Procter & Gamble, CBS Television, the United Fruit Company, the American Tobacco Company, General Electric, Dodge Motors, and he also spearheaded the national campaign to fluoridate the water supply of America through the fluoridationist of the Public Health Service. He was hired by multiple presidents to engage in propaganda campaigns against the American people, as well as the U.S. Army. Another quote from his book Propaganda: "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our government. We are governed, our minds are molded, our taste formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of." Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels publicly praised Bernays on many occasions and stated that Bernays' work was the blueprint used by the Nazis to seize control of the Reich. Edward Bernays advanced the science of propaganda light years. But more than 60 years after his heyday, the science of mind control is thousands of times more sophisticated than even Bernays had envisioned. Since the dawn of man, bullies have attempted to dominate and control the tribe. Human history has been one long struggle of the independent free human against organized crime syndicates attempting to enslave him. Brute force has been replaced with intimidation and propaganda. We are manipulated into enslaving ourselves. We are conned into believing that the establishment is our loving keeper and not our parasitic master. The New World Order architects are a group of predatory control freaks who have enslaved humanity and are desperate to keep control of their cattle. The elite is threatened by independent free humans who control their own destinies. They're threatened by intelligence, by beauty, by honor, by family. They seek to control and steer the destiny of humanity in a direction that secures their power monopoly forever. They are sadistic. They are callous. They think nothing of human life, only control and keeping that control. The entire world is being engineered, designed to be a prison planet, a control grid over free humanity, where no dissent is tolerated. Once you realize that the establishment is laughing at you, you can begin to research the truth and start fighting back. Once you understand their game plan, it's very easy to defeat. Knowing who your enemy is half the battle. Taking action is the other half. You only have to free your mind, and defeating the globalist will be easy.
I hear people say, well, that would be from the metal of the planes. Well, that might work for the towers, possibly, but it sure doesn't work for Building 7. You know, it was 300 plus feet away from the North Tower, and no plane hit it. So where does this molten metal come from? So pretty quick then, as I studied this, I wrote up a paper. which many of you have seen. If you haven't, I hope you would. Just Google on Steve Jones, World Trade Center. It'll pull it right up. And I studied various aspects, and the molten metal is my first topic. It's the one that really caught my interest, and the data is just coming together. Now, I have a sample of this molten metal, previously molten metal here. Just a tiny sample. This is really all we need. I brought along with me at the last minute. I thought, well, I'll throw that in. And by analyzing this, we determined it is not molten aluminum from the plane. Okay. Indeed, it contains a great deal of iron, which is the product of the thermite reaction. Now, thermite can be purchased on eBay, and many people, I show it in my class, physics, and I'll be showing it this fall in my physical science class. It's commonly shown. It's a very brilliant reaction. You get this white flare, this white dust, which is aluminum oxide coming off, and then this yellow hot molten metal, just white yellow hot, you know, flowing out of this reaction. Now this thermite is so hot, this molten iron, especially when you mix sulfur in. Now it's called thermate. So sulfur added to this molten iron, it'll just cut through steel, through structural steel, for example, like a knife through butter. And we also see this molten, yellow hot molten metal with white wispy ash pouring out of the South Tower just minutes before its collapse. And I've shown this video, and it's just amazing. Photographs of that, it's in the NIST report. They say, well, probably molten aluminum from the aircraft. No, sorry, it's not. We did experiments at BYU with molten aluminum. We heated the steel pan up to yellow hot temperature, pour that aluminum out. It looks like silvery aluminum, even though the pan is yellow hot. And there's reasons for that. Aluminum just doesn't emit much of this incandescent glow. It's very low emissivity. Sorry for the technical details, but the point is the experiments show it still looks silvery, and yet out of the World Trade Center it's yellow hot, okay? So as we looked at this, and the evidence is just piling up, this is, it has the characteristics not of molten aluminum and not of molten, you know, it's not just structural steel that somehow melted, no. It's very little chromium. But it does have sulfur and manganese and some other elements that are characteristic, you see. It's like a fingerprint that the criminal left behind. This carries with it evidence. How was this done? What was used? And I should explain real quickly. This particular, people ask me all the time, where'd you get this? Well, there's a woman in Northeast who is involved, went to one of these memorials that was being put together, you know, the 9/11 memorial, structural steel from the World Trade Center. She noticed on it dirt clinging to the structure. This is several years ago, before I joined the game here, so to speak. And she said, well, that dirt is going to be subject to rain. It's just going to be a mess. And so she just cleaned it up. She just cleaned some of that dirt off. You know, it's in the Northeast, and this memorial's going up. She cleaned it up, put it in a bucket. She saved it. Then as soon as my paper appeared, she read my paper. This last November would have been. As she read my paper, I'm calling for an investigation, particularly of this molten metal, and see what's going on. It'll tell us what happened, give us insight into what really happened on 9/11. Well, she immediately sent me this sample, quite a large sample actually, but not all of it. She said, I'm keeping some back, and I said, that's good, because we may want to, you know, have another lab check it. Don't send it here, you know, you'll send it to another lab directly at some point, probably. Anyway, in there, I don't think she even noticed, there's this molten metal chunks, see? In with this, just from this memorial to 9/11 and to the families, who I deeply sympathize with those families. So we checked this metal, and that's how we got it. And another sample like it, same characteristics, high in iron, manganese, fluorine. I mean, you know, where do these chemicals come from? And then as I studied about thermite, arson, I'll wrap it up here.
No, I was checking to see if my mic was live, Professor. It's key to state you got it from another site separately.
Yes, we have two separate sites. This other one, okay, so, but similar process, acquiring this, just private people, and so anyway, the point is, as we analyze this, I get into this question of thermite arson. It turns out that arsonists, these are the bad guys, right, start fires using thermite. I mean, you can buy this stuff on eBay. It's not like it's a secret or something. And I don't recommend you play with this stuff, by the way. It's very dangerous. Okay, molten yellow hot iron pours out of this. It's highly dangerous, but it will cut through iron. So arsonists use it, and now there's a whole field then of investigation. Investigators know how to look at this metal, and so but these things are coming together. This chain of evidence. This is not the only thing. This is just one of the things. The collapse of Building 7 is another. Studied that. A great paper by Professor Cutler. It's in the Journal of 9/11studies.com. You can look that up. His paper on the collapse of Building 7. And so anyway, this chain of events leads me to reluctantly conclude that indeed there does seem to be insider. In other words, not just the hijacked planes, but also others involved setting these thermite cutter charges in the World Trade Center to bring them down. This again leads to the conclusion that our Constitution, which is our heritage as Americans, I love my country, I love the Constitution and the people in America. I'm afraid that our Constitution is literally hanging by a thread at this stage. And
Professor, can you specifically, because you've talked about this on my radio show, you've published it, you looked at the thermite, you tested, it's not just thermite, it's the patented thermate.
With the sulfur.
With the sulfur on top of it as an accelerant. Then we expand on that. This is even patented. This is actually used to cut large pillars.
It's true that when you add sulfur to the thermite, it now cuts very quickly through steel. And again, do you remember earlier I spoke of this paper I read? These metallurgists in Massachusetts had looked at World Trade Center 7 steel and some from the towers also. Strange, they said, that high temperature sulfidation. Where does this sulfur come? Where do these high temperatures come from? Well, the answer, you see, we're getting at, it's totally consistent with this thermate.
So specifically, you looked at the science, and only thermite could create these molten pools that a month later were still at many thousands of degrees hotter than jet fuel burns down in the basement collapse area. And then you have the hypothesis thermite could do that. It's a prime suspect. You get samples. It's not just thermite. It's the demolition special design thermate.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
That's accurate. I mean, and it's consistent with these other metallurgists. See, that was in the New York Times as this sulfidation of the steel came out. World Trade Center 7, there's no airplane that hit it. And so how do you explain this? And then the towers too. And the New York Times said,
in February 1993, approximately 130 men, women, and children lived in a large house just outside Waco, Texas, on property they called the Mount Carmel Center. The leader of this group was 33-year-old Vernon Howell, who later changed his name to David Koresh. David believed he had been asked by God to deliver the message of the book of Revelations in the Bible to the world. Rachel, David's wife, and their 3 children also lived at Mount Carmel. The Mount Carmel property was established as a religious retreat by its founders in 1935. Followers came to be known as Branch Davidians. In 60 years, there had been only one incident in an otherwise unblemished record of the Branch Davidians' peaceful existence with their neighbors. Former leader George Roden's wife gave leadership of the group to Koresh. Roden then unearthed a dead woman in her coffin and challenged Koresh to see who could raise the dead woman. Koresh called the police, who said they needed evidence. Koresh and several followers went to the ranch to take pictures of the coffin, and Roden opened fire. Roden was shot in the finger. Koresh and 7 others were arrested. All were later acquitted. Former leader George Roden also accused David Koresh of getting his 75-year-old mother pregnant.
He raped my mother,
In response, David replied,
"If I took a 70-year-old woman and got her pregnant, you better watch out. I'm God."
This statement, obviously said sarcastically, was repeated out of context over and over in the news media and by the FBI in the next weeks to portray David Koresh as having claimed he was God. Many people at Mount Carmel held responsible jobs in the outside community. Wayne Martin was a well-known and respected Harvard-educated lawyer. Sherry Jewell was a computer analyst and teacher. David Jones was a mailman. Mike Schroeder and Woody Kendricks were craftsmen. Church services were no different than what you'd expect at any church service.
His tongue is the pen of a ready writer. So how's God going to talk to me in the latter days? And who's going to bring that book? So there'll be no excuses.
The Branch Davidians were well liked by many of their neighbors. And the Branch Davidians had some distinguished neighbors over the years. Texas Governor Ann Richards grew up in Waco. William Sessions was the mayor and a judge in Waco before he became director of the FBI. ATF Director Stephen Higgins and FBI spokesman Bob Ricks both attended Baylor University in Waco. And President Clinton recently appointed a new commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. She, too, is from Waco. The house was built by the labors of the people who lived there. What pains are taken to preserve evidence. Here, tanks methodically push what remains of the house and evidence into the fire. The fire takes less than an hour to burn down the entire center. The fire is still smoldering at 5 that evening as agents walk in and around the fire. It is obvious that there is no genuine concern over the supposed millions of rounds of ammunition. Even though the FBI and the media consistently referred to this cement building as the bunker, the real bunkers were underground, as you were shown earlier. Many of the bodies that were found in the underground bunkers, not in the well house. In one final crude and insensitive display, the ATF raised its flag in victory over the ruins of Mount Carmel before the day was over. One voice was heard that day telling the truth. Brad Branch, a Branch Davidian who had left the Mount Carmel Center before the day of the fire.
Now they're finishing off the job right now. They're destroying the crime scene. America, this is the biggest lie that's ever been put before the American public, ever.
In this update, we're going to examine a few, though certainly not all, of the lies told by the ATF and FBI in their official independent investigations of Waco. We invite inquiries from the media. In fact, we dare the media to finally publicize the truth. And we challenge each member of Congress to demand and conduct congressional inquiries into the events in Waco. But first, we're going to show you why the government lied. This photograph was taken at the front door of the Branch Davidians' house the morning the ATF arrived. If you examine it carefully, you can see there was a child outside as the ATF began firing wildly. The features of the child in the photograph were deliberately blurred by someone to prevent recognition. This alteration can be seen by the naked eye examining a print from the negative. The alteration is more proof of the depths to which people have stooped in covering up the truth about what happened that day. The child has been identified as probably being Cyrus Koresh, David Koresh's 8-year-old little boy. After the raid, these agents were captured on film running with a small body to an ambulance. If these agents were carrying an adult, you would see legs or some part of the body extending below or beyond the agents themselves. Other children were killed that day, too, as a helicopter fired down into the house. Annetta Richards, one of the grandmothers who came out with the children, told the world that she and the children had been fired down upon by the helicopters. Children who left Mount Carmel the day after the raid drew pictures for the psychiatrists who interviewed them.
And then as I asked her, is there anything else? She took her crayon and went, and I asked what that was, and she said that was bullets.
More proof that the helicopter had fired down on a room full of women and children. Dick DeGuerin, the attorney who entered Mount Carmel during the siege,
also said he saw the room and bullet holes where a helicopter had sprayed the roof of the home, killing a nursing mother and children in the room. Unfortunately, he didn't share this information with the public until after the fire, nor did his former college classmate from Baylor University, FBI Director William Sessions. And in the tape-recorded conversations between the Branch Davidians and the McLennan County Sheriff's deputy, known as the 911 tapes, the Branch Davidians frequently refer to the helicopters firing in on them from overhead, and they are clearly terrified of them.
They're chopper with more of them. What? Another chopper with more people and more guns going off. Here they come. All right. Wayne, more firing. That's not us, that's them. Okay, all right.
David Koresh, in the 911 tapes and in a radio interview, says that the ATF killed his children.
No. Let me tell you something.
Yes, sir.
You see, you brought a bunch of guys out here and you killed some of my children. We told you we wanted to talk.
This photograph shows one of the helicopters used by the government on the day of the raid. This helicopter has a .308 machine gun mounted in the doorway. Notice the words United States Army on the tail, contrary to the government's claims that the 3 helicopters at Waco were unarmed National Guard helicopters. Remember how government officials frequently told us that the Branch Davidians were abusing the children, as if this raid was for the children?
What impressed me is that the Bureau time after time asked Koresh for some evidence that the children were okay. He sent in, the Bureau sent in videotapes asking Koresh to do something to prove that the children were okay. Negotiators consistently asked that the children be sent out. We did not receive verification that the children were okay.
The report admits that Janet Reno lied when she told us that David Koresh had refused to send out videotapes showing the condition of the children. It says, that night the Davidians sent out a videotape of the children in the compound. The negotiators' log shows that when the tape was reviewed, there was concern that if the tape were released to the media, Koresh would gain much sympathy. These 2 men, Olaitan Oyetumbi and Gary Spalding, drove day and night from South Bend, Indiana to bring baby food and chicken feed requested by the Branch Davidians to Mount Carmel. As you can see, they were very peaceful. Yet they were arrested. Their crime? Bringing baby food to Mount Carmel. This occurred only 3 days before Janet Reno claimed that the government assault with tanks was out of concern for the children. In these scenes from the day of the fire, shown in Waco the Big Lie, you can see that a tank was over the outdoor underground tunnel for more than 2 hours that morning. You can see agents getting in and out of those tanks over the underground bunker. And you can see that smoke was pouring from the underground bunker less than 5 minutes before a tank smashed the end of the house. The tank collapsed the house down onto the trap door to the underground bunker. Anyone in that bunker was trapped. No one in the house would be able to run to the safety of the bunker to escape the deadly gas and flames. Autopsies showed that many children died of blunt trauma. On the Maury Povich show, Coroner Rodney Crowe told how those children died.
3 children had blunt force trauma, but it was from the falling concrete in the bunker that fell on them. There's an opening in the top of the bunker, 8 feet approximately in diameter, and large chunks of concrete fell on these people.
21 of them died of gunshot wounds, and the rest died of smoke inhalation and, of course, suffocation due to being buried in debris when the bunker collapsed.
So now we know why the Treasury Department, the White House, and ATF and Department of Justice were so desperately lying to us all along. We were told every day that this raid, the gassing, the attack on the house, and the destruction of evidence had all been because of concerns for the children.
We had concerns for the children.
The big lie continues. The ATF is under the direct control of the Treasury Department. As head of the Treasury Department, Lloyd Bentsen would be ultimately responsible for any wrongdoing by ATF. Yet it was Bentsen who chose the so-called independent investigators. Each of the 3 so-called independent investigators Bentsen chose had been involved directly in the planning, execution, or cover-up of the police firebombing of the headquarters of a group called MOVE in Philadelphia that resulted in the fiery deaths of MOVE members in a situation similar to Waco. According to the introductory letter from Treasury Secretary Lloyd Bentsen to President Clinton, the committee's report was supposed to be a vigorous and thorough investigation of the events leading to the loss of law enforcement and civilian lives near Waco, Texas on February 28, 1993. But on the cover of the report, it doesn't say it is a thorough investigation of the events in Waco. It says it is an investigation of Vernon Wayne Howell. Even in the Treasury's report, which was not released until September 1993, the ATF persists in calling the Branch Davidian house the heavily armed fortress-like compound, even though by now we have all seen that the house was a simply constructed masonite exterior frame home. And on page 3 it begins, "in memory of," and then names each of the deceased ATF agents. There doesn't seem to be any question of whether this was going to be an independent or vigorous and thorough investigation of the events on February 28, 1993. The overall perspective for the raid was spelled out in an internal Treasury Department memorandum from Christopher Kyler, Assistant Treasury Secretary for Enforcement, to Mike Langan before the raid, in which Kyler matter-of-factly says that the agents will be raiding a Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventist church. It doesn't get any plainer than this. They've spelled it out for us. The government set out to conduct a military assault on a church. This same memorandum specifically says that the ATF raid will be assisted by state, local, and military authorities. Again, spelling it out for us, every level of government participated in this military terroristic attack on a church full of 140 men, women, and children. The results of the supposedly independent investigation, known as the Treasury Report, were released September 29, 1993. It berated ATF leadership for failing to cancel the raid when they knew the ATF had lost the element of surprise. ATF Director Stephen Higgins and others were forced to resign, with full pensions. The ATF tried to make it seem that they were admitting error by blaming leaders for losing the element of surprise.
And we had our plan down, we had a diversion down, all were put into effect, and they were waiting.
What we had was someone who eliminated the element of surprise, which is what we needed, and in so doing, our agents walked into an ambush.
The main problem we had, I don't believe, is that we were outmaneuvered or outplanned. The problem we had is that we were outgunned. You know, they had bigger firearms than we had. They were able to shoot through doors, and due to that, you know, a lot of our agents were hurt.
The ATF had the Branch Davidians under surveillance for over a month from the house across the street. They knew the land was completely flat. There could be no possibility of surprising the Branch Davidians with 100 men arriving in cattle cars visible from miles away. The Treasury report admits that ATF's own public relations person, Sharon Wheeler, contacted several Dallas television stations several days before the raid. The lie that the ATF lost the element of surprise was aided by the media while showing us this very edited piece of footage of the first day of the raid over and over, as an announcer would say, the ATF was met with a hail of gunfire. And just in case you somehow hadn't heard the ATF claim that the Branch Davidians were waiting for the ATF, within a week after Mount Carmel was burned to the ground, NBC television aired the government's official propaganda as a movie, showing Branch Davidians at all the windows with guns waiting for the ATF to arrive. If you have doubts that this was propaganda, consider that the Treasury report repeatedly states that U.S. Army Special Forces planned the raid and trained the agents. The ATF raid leader is former Special Forces, and even advisors to the independent investigators included Delta Force Special Forces. Then, get a copy of this Army Psychological Operations Training Manual, a how-to on propaganda that says that making a movie is an important element of military occupation. Another lie told by ATF in the official report says, on Wednesday, February 24th, ATF rescheduled its raid from Monday, March 1st to Sunday, February 28th, because it expected the Tribune-Herald to publish its Sinful Messiah series on Sunday. The warrants were signed on February 25th and expired on February 28th, the day the raid took place. The raid was never moved up a day, and these warrants weren't filed with the court until March 1st either. The ATF is lying when it claims they lost the element of surprise, and the ATF is lying when it says it moved the raid up a day so as not to lose the element of surprise. So were the Branch Davidians waiting for them, or is that a lie too? John McLemore is a reporter for KWTX Channel 10 television in Waco, Texas. Both he and cameraman Dan Maloney were present at Mount Carmel on February 28th, the day ATF raided Mount Carmel, and they claim to have filmed the scenes of the initial raid. In one of the first Associated Press newspaper reports that came across the wire services on February 28th, John McLemore is quoted as saying, "They came right in, parked right by the front door, and made a frontal assault on the building." Another article across the AP wires on February 28th said that, according to witnesses, federal agents hid in livestock trailers as they drove up to the compound. As 3 National Guard helicopters approached, the 100 law officers stormed the main home, throwing concussion grenades and screaming, "Come out!" There is no mention of any barrage of gunfire from the Branch Davidians in these first reports. And in actuality, the Branch Davidians reacted the way any American would react when his home was broken into by armed terrorists. They first called the police. They dialed 911.
911, what's your emergency?
There are 75 men around our building.
Okay, just a moment.
In the tape recordings of these conversations, we can hear the fear and distress of Wayne Martin as he says,
"Yeah, tell them there are children and women in here and to call it off."
Brad Branch, a Davidian who was also interviewed by phone, described it this way.
When they jumped out, David opened the door and put his hand out and says, "Now hold on, we have women and children in here." And bullets started hitting the door and all through the foyer, and that's when we slammed the door.
The Treasury report also says Koresh appeared at the front door and yelled, "What's going on?" From that statement in the report, we have an admission by ATF that Koresh came to the door. The Treasury report next claims that the agents identified themselves, stated they had a warrant, and yelled, "Freeze" and "Get down." Examining the official report for plans for the raid, there is absolutely no plan for any agent to first knock at the door or announce the agent's presence. The ATF planned the entire raid using dynamic entry teams, who were to burst through the front door, underground bus, and upstairs windows simultaneously. David Koresh, in an interview with CNN, said it happened like this.
They started firing at me. And so what happened was that I fell back in the door and the bullets started coming through the door. And so then what happened was some of the young men and stuff started firing on them. And I was already hollering. I was saying, "Go away." You know, I was hollering, "Go away. There's women and children here. Let's talk."
The Treasury report next says, but Koresh slammed the door before the agents could reach it. Gunfire from inside the compound burst through the door. The force of the gunfire was so great that the door bowed outward. Then gunfire erupted from virtually every window in the front of the compound. This photograph, taken by a Waco Tribune-Herald reporter, proves that all of these claims in the Treasury report are absolute lies. Since the door is still cracked open, it obviously was never bowed outward from the force of shots inside, which would have slammed the door shut before any bowing could occur. If any shots had been fired from inside, the exit holes of the bullets would have split and chipped paint and the outside of the door. The holes in the door are neat and uniform and are obviously holes made by bullets shot from outside by ATF. There are no Branch Davidians at any of the windows. This scene of the front door was also filmed from a side view by KWTX Channel 10. Here, too, you can see that no one is shooting at the agents behind cars at the front door. No bullets are hitting any of the car windshields or throwing up dirt around the agents. In additional footage of the initial raid that was released through the media, we see the agents climbing the ladders to the roof on the side of the house. These agents were supposed to be on the roof within 33 seconds after arrival, according to the plan. Machine gun fire is clearly heard in the forefront coming from the ATF. ATF agents yell, "Too much live fire," telling their agents to quit firing wildly. Many of these agents are carrying MP5 submachine guns and rifles. Notice that no one is shooting at these agents either as they climb the ladders. Once on the roof, these agents do not come under fire, even as they laboriously break into a window on the roof, while a fourth agent lies on the roof. Listen carefully to the background sounds as we watch this again. A helicopter is close overhead, but there is a cut in the film from a close shot to a wide shot, and the helicopter sounds change abruptly. The ATF has claimed none of its helicopters had guns that day, but in each segment where a helicopter approached the house, we also found a cut in the tape footage.
I'm rolling.
Don't turn the camera off.
Go back to the car and give me another tape then.
This agent is carrying a smoke grenade. He has already drawn his 9mm handgun before he goes in the window. Notice that he is also carrying grenades on a belt on his leg. The agents toss smoke grenades into the room before they enter the window.
Don't turn the camera off.
Go back to the car and give me another tape then.
After these agents get in the window, there is an obvious glitch in the tape here, too. American Justice Federation did not make any of these cuts in the videotape. We are showing you the tape segments exactly as we found them. We can prove this tape was shown by other TV stations with exactly the same cuts in it. Reporters for KWTX Channel 10 in Waco, Texas, supposedly shot this video the day of the raid. The Vice President of News for KWTX Channel 10 is Virgil Teeter, and his phone number is 817-776-1330. Call him and ask why he has not released all the video footage to the American public, and why the footage that has been released has been so badly altered, and who did the altering. The film picks up again with this agent tossing something into the room.
How many bells would we ran out for?
Now in Waco the Big Lie, we showed you how this agent first tosses a grenade into the room. He withdraws his hand, then shoots into the room. Shots begin coming out of the room. He is then hit by a round in the back of the helmet. He falls to the roof, grabbing the back of his head. Then he gets up and slides rapidly down the ladder. One of the problems with this tape footage is that the sounds do not coincide with what can be seen. Notice that in the segments immediately before and after this scene, you can hear a lot of noise in the background.
I'm rolling.
Don't turn the camera off.
Go back to the car and give me another tape then.
First, let's turn off the sound altogether and examine where the bullets come from. The agent tosses a grenade. He pulls back the curtain and fires into the room. Then shot 1 comes from inside the room. Shot number 2 comes from overhead. Numbers 3 and 4 come from inside the room. Number 5 makes 3 holes at once from the inside. 6 goes up from inside. The agent fires again. 7 comes from inside and strikes the agent. Shots 8, 9, and 10 come from overhead. 11 and 12 come from inside. 13 comes from out in the yard. 14 comes from below the roof, and 15 makes 3 holes at once from the inside. There are at least 6 separate weapons firing in this scene. The gun the agent on the roof is firing, the gun that fires the single shots from inside, the gun that shoots 2 3-round single shots from inside, the gun firing from overhead, the gun firing from below the roof, and the gun firing from out in the yard. These weapons should not sound alike, and they should not sound the same distance from the camera. Now listen to this scene with the audio as it was released by KWTX Television in Waco, Texas. You can hear the sound of the grenade exploding, but after that, the bullet sounds are virtually identical, and there are places in the tape where there is absolute total silence, or the background noise cuts in and out, all signs of heavy editing. In this 3D computer wire illustration, you can see the trajectory of bullets 2, 8, 9, and 10 from overhead, showing that the bullets came from almost directly above. It will be important later on to know the locations of various objects in the yard. Here we see a gray shed where 3 agents will be seen later. This is a blue tarp covering equipment near the house. These are storage tanks out in the yard. One of the Branch Davidians' buildings was a high tower located here. The camera filming all these scenes was located approximately here, way out in the yard, using a long telephoto lens. On March 5th, the ATF released a detailed story to the Dallas Morning News, complete with diagrams and descriptions of where the 4 agents who were killed had died. ATF's story and diagrams showed that all 3 of the agents who had gone in that window had died inside that room. Here is one of those so-called inoperable weapons systems. After the fire, we have several scenes that show active-duty military emerging from the tanks. Many are wearing dark maroon berets, just like those consulting 7th Army Special Forces from Fort Bragg wear. This is a portable flamethrower, which was used in World War II and in Vietnam, particularly to blast underground bunkers. The tanks are worn on the agents' backs, similar to what can be seen in these pictures during the siege at Waco. A better view of this type of outfit is seen as an agent gets out of a tank. The camera cut away here, but when it returned, the agent is being assisted by another agent. In this scene, 2 agents obviously are dragging what appears to be a body, but this does not appear to be a rescue. As they reach the far side of the tank, you can see that one of the agents has a portable tank on his back and engages in a spraying motion. Suddenly, fire flares up. This is a thermite bomb. Variations are known as incendiary grenades. It explodes on impact and burns with extremely high, intense heat made of either phosphorus or magnesium. After the fire is nearly out at Mount Carmel, agents approach the concrete building that used to be inside the house. An explosion can be heard and flames and smoke erupt from the concrete building. Notice that the agents don't take cover or run away as they would if this had been an unexpected explosion. In any crime scene, great care is ordinarily taken to preserve evidence, yet during the fire at Mount Carmel, tanks constantly pushed debris into the fire. Afterwards, the entire area was bulldozed and all the underground tunnels were filled in. And continuing to show the same careful regard for the preservation of evidence as demonstrated earlier, and with a total lack of respect for the humanity lost at Mount Carmel, an agent relieves himself in the ashes beneath one of the tanks that was used to destroy the Branch Davidians. Ironically, that night, as Mount Carmel still smoldered, President Clinton spoke in Washington, D.C. at a dedication of the Holocaust Museum dedicated to the people tortured and murdered by the Nazis in Germany. It is especially ironic that the Branch Davidians were attacked the same day, 50 years later, that the Nazis had attacked the Warsaw Ghetto in Germany, and it was 50 years to the day after the Nazis burned the Warsaw Ghetto that Mount Carmel was burned to the ground. As Bill Clinton commemorated the memorial, he said,
"The Holocaust began when the most civilized country of its day unleashed unprecedented acts of cruelty and hatred, abetted by perversions of science, philosophy, and law. A culture which produced Goethe, Schiller, and Beethoven, then brought forth Hitler and Himmler, the merciless hordes who themselves were educated as others who were educated stood by and did nothing. Millions died for who they were, how they worshiped, what they believed, and who they loved."
Was he talking about Nazi Germany, or was he talking about Waco, Texas in 1993?